Schmitt, and more specifically, his employment of political theology in opposition to democratic theory and practice. That is the chief obstacle to political theology realizing its own radically democratic potential. My argument is that by Schmitt's conflation of democracy with modern liberalism, Schmitt effectively throws the baby out with the bathwater. While political theology might get its impetus from the despair over the perceived failures of modern liberalism, it need not and must not be allowed to translate into a rejection of democracy as such. This is Schmitt's great mistake, which is one that gets reduplicated each time the assumption is made that democracy and political theology are fundamentally and necessarily incompatible. The alternative I'm proposing, and which I propose in my book here, is a democratic political theology. It is a democratic political theology that is both post-liberal and post-secular. And as a democratic political theology, it is to be understood as a necessary supplement to radical democratic theory's own efforts at rethinking the conceptual basis of democracy itself. What this means in a very concrete sense, which will become the basis and bulk of my presentation here today, is that we need to rethink the proper relationship between religion and politics. The old, modern, liberal, secular norm will no longer do. So that, we can sort of move on to the topic at hand. What is post-secularism? Or what is the post-secular? A brief word is required for my use of these terms secular and post-secular. Let me be clear, this is oftentimes confused. The term secular should not, underline should not, be understood as the opposite of religion or the absence of religion. After all, constitutionally speaking, the United States is a secular nation. There's no mention of God in the Constitution, and religion is only mentioned twice. Once when the Constitution forbids any religious test or oath for political office, and second in the First Amendment, where the government is explicitly prohibited from making any law respecting an establishment of religion and from impeding the free exercise of religion. If we are secular by law, we also happen to be among the most religious nations in all of the industrialized world. So we are both secular and religious at one and the same time, without contradiction. As one religion scholar puts it, we're secular by law and religious by choice. If the term secular does not mean the opposite or absence of religion, then what does it mean? Most often, it has been taken to mean the separation of church and state. While I myself certainly support this aspect of our cultural and political heritage, and would point out the paradox that it is precisely by virtue of this separation of church and state that religious life in the United States has thrived and remained vibrant throughout our history. That is to say, precisely because we regard religion as voluntary here in the United States, it has remained relevant. But I also think there's some unfortunate connotations to the phrase separation of church and state, specifically two. First, when people talk of the separation of church and state, they oftentimes mistakenly think that religion is an exclusively private matter of individual conscience that has no bearing whatsoever on public life or politics. For example, as the American philosopher Richard Rorty once put it, the problem with interjecting religion into public discourse and politics is that it is, quote, a conversation stopper, end quote. You have your religion and your religious authority, I have mine. To the extent that we accept the dictates of our religion as the final authority, we're incapable of conversation or compromise. We're left stuck in our rival camps. Second, and relatedly, when people talk about the separation of church and state, they oftentimes mistakenly think that the cordoning off of religion from politics and vice versa, as if religion and politics are to be kept entirely separate and distinct. Of course, we know, and say this as strongly as I can, we know this is not how things actually work. Like it or not, there is a reason, after all, that public surveys confirm time and again that the single most thing that would disqualify a presidential candidate from consideration is if he or she were an atheist. I'm not saying that's the way things should be. I'm just saying that's the way things are. And public surveys confirm that time and again. On some level, Americans seem to believe that if their presidential candidates are sufficiently, but not overly, religious, they can be trusted to do the right thing. They have a proper moral compass, that they are somehow one of us. Likewise, when we decide about which issues of public policy we care about, our religious beliefs most certainly factor into this equation. Whether it is these hot-button social issues like abortion or gay rights, or more nebulously, the concern over social justice, poverty, and inequality. What we believe has an impact on how we vote. So I'm suggesting that the separation of church and state should not be understood as the separation of religion and politics. Religion and politics do and always have interacted. The question, therefore, is not whether religion and politics relate, but how. It is with this question in mind that we move from the old, modern, secular norm to the new, post-secular understanding.